Then they'll want to see this.
Alright, I got it. I got you.
You kidding me? God!
I better check on it. I'm gonna come back to this. I got a feeling it's gonna be a happy ending. Hey, what's with the screaming?
Huh? Oh, I keep burning myself building a virtual reality device.
Why?
Because that mime refuses to go out with me. She said something about me smelling bad.
Said? I thought mimes were just...
Well, she didn't say so much as gesture, you know, she's... The message was received.
So let me get this straight. You decided to jack in, make a virtual version of her in order to help you deal with rejection.
Yeah.
Makes sense to me.
Oh, it makes total sense. And actually, I think I'm all done. Time to give it a shot.
I heard you like Sega. I like Sega too.
Yeah, but you're wearing a Nintendo shirt.
So why don't you help me take it off?
Yeah. Yeah, I can do that.
So, how did it go?
I saw her. But then, suddenly I started getting beat up by an invisible man.
Some invisible guy beat you up in the cyber world? Sounds like you were in the Matrix.
What? That never happened in the movie.
Not the movie, the video game. Shadowrun. You jack in the Matrix, fight some invisible guys.
That never happened in Shadowrun. You can see your enemies. I should know. Play the Genesis version all the time.
There's invisible guys in the Super Nintendo game. I feel bad for you only playing the Sega game. Shadowrun on Super Nintendo is better.
No way! Shadowrun is better on Sega Genesis.
Shadowrun is a tabletop role-playing game set in a fictional future. It combines elements of cybernetics, magic, and fantasy. It was developed in 1989 and became an instant hit. The success of the game led to collectible card games, novels, and of course, video games.
There have been many Shadowrun video games made, and even some through Kickstarter. But the games we're looking at today are the Super Nintendo game developed by Beam Software and the Sega Genesis game developed by Blue Sky Software. Two very different takes on the Shadowrun universe. Which one is better? Let's find out.
I think you're going to be impressed by the Super Nintendo graphics. In my game, you see the world from an isometric viewpoint. There's lots of unique looking characters and a good variety of enemies. There's also lots of great looking areas to explore, and the Matrix system has a great look too. A pretty good representation of what it looks like to virtually hack into cyberspace.
If you think those graphics are good, you're about to be blown away by the Sega game. In my game, you see the world from a much more practical top-down viewpoint. The characters have a unique look as well. I also have plenty of different enemies. My game has lots of different areas to explore too, all with a different look from one another. And it's all topped off with my beautiful looking Matrix. And my Matrix looks so much better than yours. This is what the Matrix should look like. See how vast and exciting this Matrix is? I've got lightning everywhere. And then look at the Super Nintendo. That's not the Matrix. That's not the Matrix at all. And now the top 5 things the Super Nintendo Matrix looks like. Number 5, a purple chessboard. Can we get that on the purple chessboard. Okay, number 4, a purple checkers board. Huh? That's a little I think someone's being a little lazy in the writer's room. I think someone's gonna get fired.
I'll say.
And number 3 of things the Super Nintendo Matrix looks like. Bathroom floor tiles. Hey, let's look a little bit. Aren't those the ones that you have in your bathroom?
Oh, guilty as charged.
Alright, number 2. Ice cube tray.
You know what?
wait, what was that?
It's funny, because you fight ice in the Sega Matrix, but it's the Super Nintendo game that looks like an ice tray. Yeah?
Leave the jokes to me. Seriously. And the number 1 thing the Super Nintendo Matrix looks like, Greg's suit for his date last weekend. Thank you and good night.
Hey, I don't need to explain my fashion sense to you. Besides, I still think my game looks better. One thing sorely lacking in the Sega game is the people. In the Super Nintendo game, people are everywhere. It feels like a lived-in world. In the Sega game, there are people, but it's a little weird. Let me explain. In Sega, you talk to a lot of different people, but all you see of them is a profile picture. You never see a sprite version of them in the game. It's almost like they don't exist. You enter a building and immediately goes to dialogue. You never see the person interact with the main character. On Super Nintendo, you see the sprite version and you get the profile picture. The Sega game feels more impersonal. The Super Nintendo people exist in sprite form and feel more accessible, more real.
Well, despite feeling less real, the Sega game still looks better. Just look at the characters. You have tiny pixelated people on Super Nintendo, and then you have crisp and clear looking characters on Sega. The locations on SNES are also a bit bland. It's not that interesting of a look into the future. The Sega game has this great gritty feel to it. There's this dystopian future look which is refreshing. And I hate beating a dead horse, but the Matrix on Sega looks so much better than the SNES version. It has this great 3D look that's still pretty impressive today. So while the game doesn't look perfect, it still looks better. Best graphics, go to Sega.
The Super Nintendo definitely has better presentation. I have an opening and ending. I have lots of in-game cutscenes. Character profile pictures look great. There's even cool cutscenes when you travel. All in all, solid presentation.
My presentation's solid too. The Sega also has an opening and ending. There's also lots of in-game cutscenes telling this vast story. Character profiles look great in my game too. Presentation is pretty matched. It's gonna be a tough decision.
Are you kidding me? My presentation is so much better than yours. Let's look at Sega's in-game cutscenes. Calling them a cutscene is a stretch, because all it is text. And look how much text there is. But there has to be a lot of text, because it's not only dialogue, but it describes actions as well. That's right, this game reads just like a book. In a highly visual medium, the Sega game chose to have people read about events instead of actually seeing them. You never see anything happen. You always just read about it. Super Nintendo, on the other hand, has lots of cutscenes. You actually see characters move and interact. You see different events unfold. Call me crazy, but I like to see things happen when I play a video game, not just read about them. This one was easy. For not behaving like a book, best presentation goes to Super Nintendo. The sounds gotta go to Super Nintendo. It has a great soundtrack. These are some rockin' tunes. There are some tough tracks. It can even be somber. Perfect for the Shadowrun world.
The Sega game also has an amazing soundtrack. It's great for setting the tone of the game. The electric sound fits in great with this world. It adds to the grittiness. It's great for a dystopian future.
My music is better, because it works well for my game.
So, my music works well for my game.
Ho ho ho! Looks like we need a good old-fashioned tiebreaker. How about you two, wrestle it out?
Yeah, and put on cat costumes too while you're at it.
Yeah, and feel free to meow at any time.
I think we should just compare sound effects.
Agreed.
Shooting sounds good on Super Nintendo.
It sounds good on Sega too.
People on Super Nintendo make noise when they're shot.
They do the same on Sega.
The sound effects aren't that great for Sega.
They're nothing special for the Super Nintendo either.
I guess that means...
Sound is a tie?
Or you could still wrestle it out.
We have the Santa costume and 80s biker costumes too, yeah?
Can we just see one nipple?
Alright, you know what? Fine.
No! Give them one nipple, then they'll want to see the second nipple, then the third nipple, then the second nipple again. It'll never end.
Ah, so close.
The Super Nintendo Shadowrun has the better gameplay. The game plays like an action RPG. It's unique in that you use a cursor whenever you perform actions. It's used for everything. To shoot enemies, use magic, pick up items, talk to people, examine objects, open doors, everything. Talking to people is unique too. You use a keyword system. By choosing the right keyword, you can learn new information or other keywords. You don't level up in this game. Instead, you get karma through fighting and put that towards traits you want improved. You can only control your main character, but you can also hire other Shadowrunners to help you out. And like I said before, there's a matrix in this game. You go there to get money, data, or open certain pathways. Gameplay in a matrix is simple. You move one space at a time, attack random invisible enemies, and retrieve data. This is a big game with lots of unique features to keep you busy.
Oh, that's cute and all, but the Sega gameplay is much better. This game also plays like an action RPG. This game doesn't use a cursor, it has a good old lock-on system to attack enemies. You can attack by shooting enemies or by using magic. There's no keyword system in my game, but there are multiple choices when conversing with someone. This game also uses karma instead of leveling up, and karma is earned by doing Shadowruns. There are many Shadowruns you can participate in. You can also hire other Shadowrunners in this game too. Then we have the Matrix. The gameplay is much more complex on Sega than it is on Super Nintendo. It plays more like a typical RPG. You have a variety of means to take out enemies. The main purpose of being in the Matrix is to get data. It's a good way to get lots of money, which is good because you need a lot in this game. You can also use the Matrix to crash surveillance in buildings. There's just so much more to do in my game. My game, unlike the Super Nintendo's, is open world gameplay. The Super Nintendo plays pretty linear. In my game, you can do Shadowrun after Shadowrun. And if you don't like a Shadowrun, you can just say no until you get one you like. And the Matrix is fun too. You can just constantly hack the Matrix for data. You can even beat the game without going into the Matrix, because it's not required. With open world gameplay ahead of its time, Sega definitely wins.
Yeah, your game has a lot to do. That doesn't make it any better. Sure, there's open world gameplay in Sega, but is it fun? No! A lot of the variety offered in your gameplay is repetitive and boring. Everything you have to do in the real world is poorly executed. For example, your bodyguard runs. You have to escort someone to a secure location and make sure they don't get attacked on the way. Seems cool, right? But in reality, you just go from one building to another. It's not exciting at all. In fact, all the shadow runs in the real world lack any excitement. It doesn't really keep you engaged. And other than the money, you don't want to do these missions. The only standout here is the Matrix runs, and even those are flawed.
Your game has plenty of flaws too. Let's focus on the cursor. It might be cool, but it slows everything down because you always need to use it. In the Sega game, if I see money, I just walk over it and it's mine. If I want to go into a building, I just walk into the door. Very simple. On SNES, you need to use a cursor in order to do any of that. You want money? You stand near it, move the cursor over it, and then collect. You want to go into a building? Stand next to the door, move the cursor over it, and then open. And sometimes, if you stand in the wrong spot, the action fails. Then you have to reposition yourself and try again. Why can't you just walk into these things? Why do we need all these tedious steps?
You're just nitpicking, because you know my game is better than yours in every way. Let's talk about money. It's easy to get money from enemies on Super Nintendo. On Sega, enemies barely drop money. Let's talk about enemies. On Super Nintendo, when you don't want to fight random enemies, you can just run away. On Sega, if you don't want to fight, you can't run away. Your character actually slows down. This practically forces you to fight, and if you just want to get away in a building, you can't. You can't enter or leave buildings when enemies are near. Another thing is, you have unlimited bullets in Super Nintendo. On Sega, you can run out of ammo. Let's talk about karma. On Super Nintendo, you get karma from killing enemies. On Sega, you only get it from doing Shadowruns. This makes killing random enemies pointless, since there's no payoff of money or experience points. Being in the real world in Sega is horrible. When you're walking, you get interrupted by a situation you need to deal with. The consequences could be good or bad. You never know if you'll pick right. The best way to deal with this is always ignore, because the rewards are never worth it, and at worst can waste life, bullets, and time.
But that's all the real world gameplay. You're ignoring the awesomeness of the Matrix.
Fine, let's talk about the Matrix. Yes, on Super Nintendo it's a simple grid where you navigate to get data and then leave. It's not much, but it works. The Sega Matrix, on the other hand, is pretty complex. I'll admit, this is definitely the most fun part of the Sega game, but it can also be confusing and frustrating. A lot of time your attacks don't work. You're just stuck there with an enemy you can't defeat or even hit, and watching your attack constantly miss is so frustrating. As frustrating as it is, you want to go back there because it's where you get the most money and karma. Lots of money and karma sounds great, right? But you know what that does? It makes all the other Shadowruns in the game pointless. And that's where the Sega game really falls flat. Balance. The real world missions are all boring. The Matrix stuff is frustrating, but it's a lot more interesting. On Super Nintendo, the real world missions play fine. And the Matrix is a bit simple, but it also plays fine. You don't dread having to do the real world or Matrix on Super Nintendo. You do dread everything you have to do in the real world on the Sega game. Why waste time, ammo, and your hit points when you can go in the Matrix, which is much safer and pays more? The Super Nintendo game, on the other hand, is well-rounded and more even-paced. The Sega game has a lot, but is so flawed in its execution. Best gameplay goes to Super Nintendo. Both games offer something different in the Shadowrun universe, but at the end of the day, only one can be better, and that game is Shadowrun for Super Nintendo. Its graphics might not be as good as Sega, but it has a much better presentation and great soundtrack. The Super Nintendo really shines in the gameplay department. The gameplay is well-rounded and fun. The Sega game offers a lot more. That's not necessarily a good thing. The Matrix is interesting, but everything else can get old fast. Sega tried, but ultimately didn't hit the mark. The Super Nintendo game is just a more overall solid RPG. Best Shadowrun goes to Super Nintendo.
Thanks for checking out our latest video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And thanks to everyone who suggested Shadowrun. And be sure to keep those other suggestions coming. We will get to them. And a special thanks to Soundole VGM Covers for making the sweet version of our theme song. Be sure to check out his page. Also, check us out on Facebook and Twitter for behind-the-scenes stuff. Later.
Huh? Wait, what was that? What was that?
What?
No, I'm acting.